Hello and welcome to this India Today special. Amidst the rising Indo-China tensions on the border, there's also an escalating sentiment against China and calls for boycotting Chinese goods and indeed for doing business without China. But is it really possible to do business without China? That's the big question I want to raise to our special guest today. Joining me now is Rajiv Bajaj, MD of Bajaj Auto. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Bajaj. Let me ask you that question directly. As a company that does business with China, is it really possible for Indian companies to do business without China?
Well, Rajdeep, I think, Bill Gates said it right when he said that we often overestimate what we can do in the short term and we underestimate what is possible in the long term. So I would say in the short term, we are probably overestimating how easy it would be to wean ourselves off China, at least for those industries and those companies like ours that are quite dependent on China, in our case for sourcing primarily, although it is a small export market for us as well. In the long term, of course, anything is possible. But I would only say that it will be also sustainable if it is done for the right reasons.
What is it, therefore, that we would need to do to make Indian business in a way sustainable? This whole call of vocal for local, to the point where we need not be dependent on importing from China.
Well, Rajdeep, I think what the Chinese have got really right, at least in terms of the two-wheeler industry, is their back end. The manufacturing, the sourcing, the logistics, etc. And particularly, we can break that down to what I like to call the 5 Ls. Issues related to land, to labor, to logistics, to electricity, and legislation. And they have managed to, get that right over time. They have managed to bring enormous scale to the back end that gives them great productivity and makes them very, very cost competitive. And therefore, for the same quality, we end up buying more competitively certain things from China. Typically, what we like to call as more standard parts, more off-the-shelf parts, rather than parts which are specifically designed for ourselves. So, if you're looking to buy large volumes of such parts, then in most cases in our industry, China is a good place to shop. So this is what they've got right. In our case, we import directly from China stuff worth almost 600-700 crores a year currently, and our tier 1 suppliers would also have significant Chinese content in their product, ranging from suspension systems to electronics. So it could well be that put together this would be in 4 digits, over 1,000 crores a year in terms of purchase value. So this is what they have got right. We were importing from China when the rupee was 60 rupees to the dollar. We are still finding it competitive to import from China at 76 rupees to a dollar. So this should give us an idea of the kind of competitiveness that is embedded in some pockets of the industry in China. In terms of what India can do, I think what, if I may say so, companies like companies like Bajaj, TVS, for example, in our industry have done right, is to focus similarly on the front end of the business. We are focused more on design, on technology, on product development, on marketing, on distribution, etc. And that is why today, from a company that 15 years back barely exported any of its production, we export now almost half of what we make. And to enable us to do that competitively and profitably, the stuff we buy from China is important. Now, people often ask me this, that if you are buying 1,000 crores worth of stuff from China, if you were to over time localize that and procure that locally, how much would that hamper or dilute your competitiveness? And my answer has always been that, look, in business, you can't deal with possibilities. As someone said, before you start with the process of possibilities, you have to begin with the purity of principles. Business has to be run on principle. It is very easy for me to say to our purchase people, go out there and buy this component from wherever it is most competitively produced in the world. I will be giving them a diffused message if I were to say to them, well, you can buy it from elsewhere provided that it is at least so much more expensive or cheaper than in India. I mean, this is not a way to give clear direction down the line. So, I would say that India has been doing, or at least in our industry, some of us have been doing the right things by focusing on the front end, on the customer, on brands, products, marketing, and distribution. And if I may say so, not in a negative sense, but if in that process, a fraction of our purchase, let's say in our case, a total of 5-7% comes from China, and as it does from some other places as well. And in that sense, if China is becoming a bit of a mini sweatshop for India, I would say that's wonderful. We should be happy with that.
Because it's interesting the way you're putting it. The fact is, auto is one of the few sectors where we've actually competed with China outside in the outside world. So what you seem to be, the word you've used repeatedly is the C, if I may call it, to add to your 5 L's, is competitiveness. If we can make our businesses competitive, then it is much better to compete with China and beat China at the game rather than say let's boycott China, because that may not really be practical. Am I correct?
Yes, and I would put it like this, Rajdeep. I completely agree with you. It's a bit like, instead of trying to box China, why don't we play some judo with them? Use the strength of your opponent against him in that sense. If China has over decades built certain competitive strength to produce stuff at scale very productively and cost effectively, while we may, as Bill Gates has said, attempt to do the same, if that makes sense, over a period of maybe 5-10 years, it's not going to be done in a year or two. But for the present moment, why not do what is right for now? And to me, what is right for now is for Indian companies to move upstream in the value chain, move closer to customers, strategically own a larger share of the profits of the image in that process, and let China feed our factories. I mean, when a Bajaj motorcycle today is sold in 70 countries, including in US, including all over Europe, in the UK, Japan, तो नाम किसका बनता है? नाम तो हिंदुस्तान का बनता है ना, चाइना का नहीं बनता.
But the fact is that Chinese seem to have the ability to scale up at the moment. When I look at the numbers of what India imports, and there's a huge trade deficit even now, which is only, increased at times over the years. 88% components used in mobile handset, 80% of products used by solar power, 40% of pharma ingredients, 60% of medical devices. They seem to be able to do whatever they do with scale, and that is something very difficult to match. So it's not just about competitiveness. They seem to have something more than just competitiveness that makes the world, not just India, so dependent on them at the moment.
I agree with you. And this is a point that even the Niti Aayog led by Mr. Amitabh Kant has been impressing upon our industry as well, that while you do well for the present, you must also invest in the future. And I always say to our colleagues that today Bajaj Auto may be a relatively large, profitable, successful company, but within every such company, there must be a small company that thinks and behaves like a startup. In our case, it is towards the purpose of building our Chetak brand in its new avatar as an electric scooter brand. We have started with one product. We will build a portfolio over time. And China is very relevant for this. Once again, I would submit to you the analogy of judo and say to you that today in China, in huge scale, you can find components related to electric vehicles, to the core of the electric vehicle, such as everyone is aware, to batteries and motors and electronic stuff. Now, it will take India time to catch up with that. Why are we late? Why is industry late? Why is policy late? Why is government late? Well, there may be good and bad reasons for that, but there is no point crying over spilled milk. I think right now our focus should be on leveraging what China has already developed, but in applying ourselves to it, and again, while it is wrong to generalize, I would still stick my neck out and say that Indians overall uh, have have demonstrated the ability to use their right brain perhaps a little more than China has, at least in our industry. So if we can leverage again the supply chain or the supply base of EV
Mm-hmm.
components, as an example, coming out of China, I can't comment on mobile phones, etc. I'm not familiar with that industry. And if we can leverage this to create,
Mm-hmm.
uh, India's Tesla, India's Gogoro, and create a future for
Mm-hmm.
ourselves with electric vehicles, I think that's again the right way to go. Again, building brands, being closer to the customer, climbing up the value curve, where all the money is going out on the limb, where the biggest fruit are. That should be our goal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it would be very narrow-minded and myopic to just be spiteful and want to take away
Mm-hmm.
from China what it has, because I think every country will have its area of strength. I don't think India will be able to do everything itself instead of working together with China and Vietnam or Thailand or Bangladesh or wherever it is. So I think, it's a bit like I think what Dolly Parton said. She said, the thing about life is it's not so important it should be
Mm-hmm.
perfect, but it should be whole. And that is why, as much as competitiveness is important, being complete is also very important. And I always say to everyone that as a global manufacturer, we would not be complete if we were to conduct our business at the exclusion of China, which is a huge market, which is a huge supply chain, and which also has lots of ideas that we can all learn from. So it is very important to take this holistic view of any country. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I think we risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Because at the moment the reactions have been, let's cancel government to government contracts if there are any for infrastructure projects. Let's have a complete ban on Chinese goods. You've got people in some bizarre situations even throwing out television sets that are Chinese owned, and there's talk of raising tariffs on Chinese goods. Do you believe that these are all short-term measures? As you say, that this battle to be an Atmanirbhar Bharat or to take on a China is a battle to be fought in the long term, and the more we resort to short-term measures, the more we forget the big picture.
Well, I think this is a misinterpretation of what the government has tried to articulate in terms of Atmanirbhar, and of course it is exacerbated by recent events to which we are all sensitive. But I think the simplest thing that I could say here is that we must not mix up issues. If we have a political issue, let the people in government deal with it, between the countries. If we don't have a political issue, but we have a military issue, let the military deal with it. Now, irrespective of the political and military issues, irrespective of whether we are quote unquote engaged in conflict or not in a particular value or the other, the question must always be asked that why is China in some respects more competitive than India? I mean, this is not a question that's relevant to me today. It was as relevant to me a month ago as well. And how can India do better? How can India build better brands, and how can India build better MNCs? So I would say this should not be mixed up with the other issues. Each issue should be looked at individually. And when I look at the issue of business or competitiveness, I look at it for its individuality, I look at it holistically, and I think I try to look at it by asking myself the question not so much as to how to make China fail, but how can India do better? How can our strategy be better? Because in the long term, what you succeed on that basis and not based on somebody else's weakness. Now, this may sound like a very obvious statement, but I think it's very important because if your success is built on somebody else's weakness, you can be sure of one thing. He's not sitting still. In a matter of time, he will overcome his weakness, and then you have lost your competitive edge. However, if you have built your position of strength based on certain skills or competencies intrinsic to you, you are likely to be more sustainable. It's like, the great strategist Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, the first step to victory begins by putting yourself out of the possibility of defeat. that is what we have to ask ourselves. Not only how we will succeed,
You
but
know,
how we de-risk that success.
mhm. Because there are those, Rajiv, who say that China is in another league. The Chinese economy, $10,000 GSDP per capita. These are numbers which are way above where we are. So, in a sense, it would be David versus Goliath. What you're saying is that David just needs to up his or her game to compete with the Chinese Goliaths. Because there are Chinese companies today which are investing in all our startups, whether it's a Baiju, a Paytm, and Ola, all of them in some way or the other, seem to have Chinese investments. They seem to be the global superpower of the moment. Can we be in the same league at all?
My response with, again, my limited experience at Bajaj would be this, Rajdeep, that one day every Goliath was a David. When Bajaj started in Africa about 15 years ago, if memory serves me right, Chinese motorcycles cumulatively, all 200 odd manufacturers together, sold maybe something like 1.5 million, 2 million motorcycles. Bajaj obviously had sold nothing. So, on that first day, we were a baby David before a giant Goliath called China. And how do you start? The best advice I have ever got when I'm faced with this kind of a challenge, it doesn't matter whether it's in business or in life, is the advice I got from a marketing guru, Jack Trout, who said, when in trouble, narrow your focus. So we narrowed our focus, both in terms of geography. We didn't try to conquer all of Africa at once, and also in terms of product range. We didn't try to put in 20 products and then hope and pray and spray. We were very sharp in our focus in terms of what we introduced, where we introduced, what kind of a roadmap we executed for ourselves. And 15 years later, although our motorcycles are priced anywhere between 10 and 50% higher than the Chinese motorcycles are, because we are more expensive, because our quality is superior, you would be happy to know that the Bajaj Boxer is the single largest selling motorcycle brand in Africa, and we apparently represent 1 out of 3 motorcycles sold in Africa. So my point is, David 15 years back is Goliath today. Now,
Yes.
whether this works for every industry or not will depend on the structure of each industry, the opportunity that is there, and such success we have achieved. Let me give you the other extreme. When we started with KTM, our relationship and partnership with them in 2007, KTM was a loss-making entity, a distinct number 2 to BMW in Europe, nowhere near Harley Davidson in the motorcycle space, making 65,000 motorcycles a year. Now, together, we are on the verge of 300,000 motorcycles. KTM has overtaken Harley Davidson in volume terms to become the #1 premium motorcycle brand in the world. And about 40% of all KTMs sold worldwide are designed, developed, manufactured, and distributed out of India. So, I can give you that example at the other end of the spectrum as well. So, I think there are
Sure.
many companies in India that have demonstrated this transformation is possible from David to Goliath. But it needs focus, it needs some very smart ideas, it needs an aligned team, and of course, it needs time and grit and patience.
Before we end, all of this is happening, of course, at a time when Indian industry itself has witnessed a slowdown. We've had the coronavirus. When I spoke to you last, you were worried about the future. We've now had, of course, the unlocking. Has that had a positive impact? Has the last month, the few weeks of June been better than April, May? Are we seeing a sign of a revival? The Prime Minister spoke the other day that he believes that we are reaching pre-COVID levels. Is there a pickup in demand? Are you seeing any green shoots of a recovery?
Yes, absolutely. The Prime Minister certainly has his ear to the ground in that respect. And you might remember my saying to you that personally, I believe we will witness more of a V-shaped recovery than anything else. And that's what's happening. So in terms of our own domestic retail sales, April was close to zero. In May, it was about 20% of what we would call normal sales. I think this month it should be close to about 66% or thereabouts, and it's getting better with the day. So if you ask me about yesterday, I would say it's almost at 80% plus. But a word of caution that all of us in industry have to offer is that a lot of this is bound to be suppressed demand that is coming back. Therefore we have to wait and see how sustainable it will be. And in that sense, the need for some mood elevator, some stimulus, customer-facing stimulus. I have said that I don't think large companies like us need any SOPs from the government. In the auto industry, in the end, your wage bill is only 4-5% of sales. So I don't think we need that. But in terms of GST reduction to say 18 from 28 or such measures, even if it is for a period of 1 year, I think, I mean, if it were my decision, I would err on the side of being safer, being cautious, put that into the marketplace, get the entire sentiment up, and then take it from there. But yes, the short answer for now is that we are in a much better place than we were.
So can I say with a short answer that the worst is over?
For now, yes, but let me give you an example. I mean, let me tell you why I put a disclaimer there, because just a few days ago, Tamil Nadu announced that starting today until the end of June, they will have another hard lockdown, whatever that means. Now, this is where, I have been saying that when you open up, when you unlock, supply chains run across all zones. And therefore, one must take a holistic view of this. Now, what has happened is we have a very well-known carburetor manufacturer by the name UCAL located there. And while it might seem that it is just Chennai and one of the other places that are shut down in this vast country of ours, but that is no consolation, because if I can't get carburetors from UCAL that is in Chennai or thereabouts, I cannot make a motorcycle. So, it is the proverbial the want of the shoe for which the kingdom can be lost. So we have to, again, I say that take a very holistic view and open up in a very aligned fashion. Then we will be okay.
Well, that's a positive note, perhaps, slightly hopeful that things could be slowly getting better. I'm glad that you've spoken to us with such clarity and quoted from Bill Gates to Dolly Parton. Where do you get all these quotes, Rajiv Bajaj? Where do you get time to be quoting from Bill Gates to Dolly Parton amidst all your various business responsibilities?
As you can see, I am not just working from home, I am working from my garden. And as they say, when you have a garden and a book, you have all you need. So I'm reading and picking up these things so I can impress people on your show.
That's a good way to impress people, Rajiv. As always, a pleasure talking to you, and I think you've given us a sense of how India needs now to take on China much more in the long term. I like the analogy, don't box with China, play judo with China. That's the one line that you've certainly left all our viewers with. Thank you very much, Rajiv Bajaj, as always, for speaking here to India Today.